Could Diddy get bail? May sound like a long shot, but is there something that could maybe change the judge's mind? Well, we're going to be speaking with the bail bondsman to the stars, Ira Judelson, about whether Diddy may get out in a rumored new bail package. He has been working with Diddy's team. Plus, what can we expect about whether the rap mogul will spend the next decade or two behind bars?
The hammer has officially dropped. That's the only way to describe the seismic shockwave that just ripped through the life and legacy of Sean Diddy Combs. We are talking about a devastating, life-altering blow. The music mogul.
Big question we're getting in the Sean Combs post-verdict world is, what's next? Right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second. He was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO, there's no longer presumption of detention, we have his passport, there's no access to private planes, there's no criminal history, this is his first conviction, he would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury, he wasn't convicted of the highest charges. He was facing up to life in prison, now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But despite the judge denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd, that was agreed by both the defense and the prosecution yesterday, could he get out beforehand? It's an interesting question. Let me bring in right now a special guest. I am joined by one of the most renowned bail bondsmen, probably in the country, definitely in New York, Ira Judelson. Ira, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar, and pleasure to meet you.
You too, Jess. Pleasure myself.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and you know, that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case going back almost 7 months ago when they brought me in as a consultant, because federal bail and state bail are 2 different things. State bail was most of the bails that I write. Federal bail, they don't need a bond.
The man who built an empire on swagger, success, and the sheer audacity of Bad Boy Records, is now staring at a significantly longer stretch behind bars. The judge's decision today is final. It is crushing, and it sends a clear, undeniable message about accountability. A message Diddy's legal team fought tooth and nail to prevent. You all remember the trial, the endless weeks of shocking testimony, the harrowing details, the revelations that pulled back the curtain on a lifestyle of alleged abuse, coercion, and exploitation that few outside his inner circle could have ever imagined. The world watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the glamorous facade of Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, whatever name you knew him by, crumbled in a federal courtroom. He was convicted of those 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, the Mann Act violations, less than the most severe charges, yes, but 2 felony convictions that carried a maximum of 10 years each. That was the first major blow. The guilty verdict itself was a psychological and professional annihilation.
Actually, you didn't tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an
Yes.
interesting argument because that who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again, even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And, I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So, we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be, I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question, I think, that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions when potentially he may get a rather lenient sentence compared to what he was facing. So 2 questions there. Do you think that it would require him to be in New York as opposed to Florida? And do you think that he'd really be in a position to violate the conditions?
First question is, I can't determine what a judge is thinking. I don't think, and this is my opinion, that the judge would let him out of the jurisdiction. I don't know. We can do private security down in Miami. We could also do private security in California, as we did with Sam Bankman-Fried.
For a man whose entire worth was tied up in his public image. But today, Today is a different kind of pain, a deeper cut. The original potential sentence, the projections, the defense's desperate plea for leniency, all of it just got tossed into the legal waste bin. The Honorable Judge Arun Subramanian, the man presiding over this legal reckoning, just made a ruling that ensures Diddy will be behind bars for much, much longer than many initially anticipated. We're not talking about a small extension here. We're talking about an official, definitive, additional block of time tacked onto his sentence. The total time now handed down is an official 50 months in federal prison, which is 4 years and 2 months. Not the maximum, but certainly not the plea bargain number the defense was aiming for. And let's be crystal clear about why this is such a colossal blow. A gut punch to the former billionaire. His defense team, they came into that courtroom today arguing for a sentence of no more than 14 months. 14 months.
I would probably think that if the judge would think about possibly a package, that he would want us to keep him here. When we first put the first package together, going a few months back, we did have an apartment here in the city that I did scout out and located a brownstone in New York that was sufficient enough, which we thought, which was one entrance in, one entrance out, for our security to be there, and no rooftop, couldn't get out from any of the windows. So we could always go back and see if that's still available. I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think he got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor
Yes.
him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really gonna watch him if he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something or risk their reputation or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court and Tony Rico and Mark Agnifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here. He's been doing this a long time. I've bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, for X amount of money. To me, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called Bailing Out the Stars. How are celebrities different? How are they different from other criminal defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, a publicist, anybody, it could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. Things change so drastically with, when I did Conor McGregor, he surrendered, he wanted out right away. Plaxico Burress, when that happened, we were talking and Mayor Bloomberg was involved allegedly in the situation, and Plaxico's bail went from X to X to X. And then I'm on the phone with his agent saying, hey, I need you to send me a copy of his deed for his place in New Jersey. And then with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, obviously, the world basically came to a standstill because he was the IMF, president, and nobody knew if he was on his way going back to Greece to lend him X amount of money to get him out of trouble. Yet we had to find him an apartment in the city. We had to get him private security. I was dealing with his ex-wife now, coming in and giving me what I need to put a...
Given the time he'd already served in pretrial detention, that would have meant Diddy walking free practically right now. Imagine that. The possibility of him being back on the street, back with his family, back to manage his shattered, but still massive, financial portfolio. Before the year was out, that was the Hail Mary pass his high-powered, expensive legal squad was throwing. They argued for time served, a chance for rehabilitation outside of prison walls, pointing to his charity work, his community contributions, his alleged remorse. They talked about the shame he'd already faced, the destruction of his brand, the hundreds of people who lost their jobs when his companies imploded. They made a compelling, albeit self-serving, case for mercy. But the prosecution, they saw a different man, a different narrative. They were relentless. They argued for a sentence of a staggering 11 years and 3 months. That's what they believed was necessary to reflect the gravity of the crimes, the systematic nature of the abuse, the unrepentant use of power and wealth to exploit victims.
Left. He also claimed that 15 years earlier, Combs told him to perform oral sex on him, reportedly suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, sexual battery. Don't have a ton of information, but for somebody who has been following so many of the civil lawsuits that he now faces, 66, 67, 68, how does this fit into all of them?
Well, it seems like it's just kind of showing a pattern that all the lawsuits seem to kind of allege of power, control, sexual pleasure, all of that stuff. I would say the timing of it is a little surprising given that it came after the verdict a little bit, but I think it kind of, again, goes to that pattern that a lot of the other civil suits we've seen, and these can be by just different attorneys too. It's not always the same attorney who's filing these suits, but it seems like they all kind of go to this pattern, it seems. But again, I'm just more surprised at the timing of it and when this was filed too.
To be clear, there are lawsuits that he's facing that contain allegations that were never discussed in any way in the criminal case.
Right.
But in the criminal case, was it ever alleged that he sexually assaulted men? Was it ever alleged that he grabbed men or forced them to do things, or was it mostly focused upon women?
Seems like it was mostly focused on women, and that being the victims in this case. I think as far as just kind of the allegations towards men were really just having to do with the escorts or the entertainers, as they were also called in the criminal trial. But for the most part, it seemed like from what we heard in the criminal trial, which I know a lot of people are a little disappointed because they thought it would be a lot more, but really it was just kind of like just different isolated incidents involving two victims, being Jane and Cassie. But it seemed like there wasn't a lot of discussion about male victims in this trial, but there were little points that were brought up in terms of like the civil matters, those including like Bonna and her civil claim, Dawn Richard and her civil claim. I think even during the cross-examination of Cassie, one of the defense attorneys, that would be Anna Esteval, she had asked, you know, was the baby oil laced? And I was thinking back to the civil claims, because a lot of civil claims had, a lot of civil suits had claimed that
And it wasn't laced.
That it was, the civil suits claimed it was laced, but then in the criminal trial, Cassie had confirmed that the baby oil was never laced with any type of narcotics or anything like that.
By the way, Combs' legal team said in a statement to Page 6, quote, Mr. Combs' trial and acquittal on trafficking and RICO charges proves what we have been saying all along. Mr. Combs never sexually assaulted or trafficked anyone. That people continue to broadcast and file false accusations, no matter how heinous and uncorroborated, is unfortunate. But Mr. Combs will not back down. He will fight for as long as necessary to win his full vindication. I talked about it on a previous sidebar, how he might tackle all these lawsuits, maybe motions to dismiss, maybe try to say, you know, these Jane and John Doe shouldn't proceed under pseudonyms. If you can convince a court of that, they may be reluctant to continue the case if they have to expose their identities. He might try to get rid of them at initial stages as much as possible.
And he was successful at that at the beginning too.
Yeah, a few of them, right?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about the jurors, okay? So first, a juror has spoken out since the verdict. Not surprising, we had a feeling this would happen. This unnamed juror apparently spoke to ABC and said that the public reaction to this decision, quote, is highly insulting and belittling to the jury and the deliberation process. We spent over 2 days deliberating. Our decision was based solely on the evidence presented and how the law is stated. We would have treated any defendant in the same manner regardless of who they are. I have nothing else to say. Now, you watched the jury, okay? And we'll talk about what an alternate juror had to say too, but you watched the jury. You watched them day in and day out. What do you make of that statement?
I was a little surprised by
Really?
that statement, just a little bit, only because, and I shouldn't say anything surprising to me when it comes to this trial. I found that statement surprising only because we clearly.
They called him a master puppeteer, a man who had not shown true remorse, a predator who hid behind a public image of success and generosity. They read from victim impact statements, bringing the harrowing details of the trauma back into the cold reality of the courtroom. The judge was left to weigh two wildly divergent interpretations of justice. And the sentence, the official 50 months, that decision landed right in the middle, but it is undeniably a victory for the victims and a crushing defeat for Sean Combs. The advisory federal sentencing guidelines, those technical legal formulas, suggested a range between 70 and 87 months. The judge, in his final ruling, came in under that advisory range, but he made sure the sentence was substantial enough to carry the weight of the court's judgment. He credited Diddy for the year and change he's already been locked up in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, one of the toughest, most notorious federal lockups in the country. But even with that credit, Diddy's projected release date is now officially set for May 8th.
Had heard the same evidence. Obviously, they saw a little bit more than I saw being inside the gallery. Some of the exhibits we weren't able to see, that sort, and that included, the freak-off tapes, the hotel night tapes, all of that stuff. And so I was surprised by the jury's decision. It's mainly to count 2. Not as surprised.
Sex trafficking.
Yeah, sex trafficking and Cassie. Yeah, not really surprised with count 1 or even count 4 either.
So racketeering and sex trafficking.
Yeah, I know, I'm just naming the counts, not actually specifying them or anything. But I get also why the juror made that very pointed statement too, because given the backlash that this jury has faced, given that a lot of people were kind of upset with the jury's decision. I mean, again, we had heard the same evidence. They saw a little bit more than obviously I saw. And so I respect the jury's decision. They were able to deliberate. I was surprised that they didn't deliberate a little longer, I'll say that. But, they're regular people, men and women, just like everybody else. And so the way they interpreted it is the way they interpreted it. And, even though I'm surprised by their outcome, I'm not surprised also by that statement either.
When the juror says how the law is stated, see, that's what stood out to me.
Yeah.
Because to me it says, hey, we couldn't magically turn this evidence into a federal crime that he was charged with. I mean, very specific elements of RICO and sex trafficking. We weren't tasked with finding him guilty of domestic violence. We were tasked with finding him guilty of beating Cassandra Ventura. Is it RICO? Is it sex trafficking? And, did the prosecution prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt? Clearly they didn't. You followed the case. Did you think it was razor's edge? You could say, you know what, I get it. I understand. At the same time, you could say, wait a minute, I think the prosecution ticked off all the boxes of that. Because I think it was, to me, and I don't know, I'm reading the tea leaves, they probably looked at this and said, it just doesn't fit with what the prosecution's trying to tell. Everybody says the case, a lot of people say the case was overcharged. I don't know if that's true, but at the very least, it seems like they had struggle trying to say there was a criminal enterprise.
Yeah.
They had struggle saying that there was force, fraud, coercion that was used against Cassie and Jane, that maybe they were willing participants or was consensual. I think it just muddied the waters a little bit. And not to take away from the testimony, but how the law is stated was interesting to me.
Yeah, it was interesting to me too, especially when it came to count 1, that being RICO conspiracy. At the back of my mind, I kind of wondered, were the jurors caught up on the whole conspiracy aspect? And did the closing arguments done by the defense really ring in their ear in terms of why weren't the co-conspirators called? Why was one of the alleged co-conspirators inside the gallery during the closing arguments, that being Fahim Muhammad, somebody that the prosecution had talked about ad nauseum, in addition to Christina Coram, aka KK. So I think in terms of the conspiracy aspect, when it came to the predicate acts of drug distribution and arson and even bribery, I felt like the prosecution made very strong cases for those arguments, especially those particular predicate acts. Maybe forced labor I kind of understood. Maybe some of the other stuff I kind of understood. But I was really surprised that they didn't check at least maybe 2 of those boxes, but then that would have made him guilty of RICO conspiracy. And so I think the prosecution tried their best to really kind of point it out in terms of the law. And they did, I think, a great job in their closing argument, but was it enough to sway the jury? Obviously not, by the decision that they made.
What about this alternate juror? So this juror who was not part of the actual deliberation spoke out on CNN, unnamed, said, I understood the final verdict. Reading all my notes, looking back at the evidence, I probably would have reached the same conclusion as the other jurors. We're looking at
2028. May 2028. That's a minimum of 2.5 more years inside. A world away from the luxury yachts and private jets he once commanded. The language the judge used, Judge Subramanian, was powerful. It was direct. And it was unforgiving. He spoke directly to the victims, specifically mentioning Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe, the other brave woman who testified. He told them, "We heard you." And then he turned to Diddy, stating that the substantial sentence was necessary to send an unambiguous message, a deterrent to other abusers, and a validation for survivors. He acknowledged Diddy's success, his positive contributions to his community, but he quickly countered that a history of good works, as he put it, cannot wash away the record of this case. You abused these women, he essentially stated, and you must be held accountable. He said he was not convinced that if Diddy were released, he would not commit those same crimes again. That statement right there, that lack of trust in his rehabilitation.
Of a video taken of this party where it allegedly shows Combs either kissing or dancing almost face to face with a purported underage girl. And the thing about the screenshots from these videos too, let me just talk about it. Jones usually claims in the suit that the writer is in possession of the video and this could be provided to court. We don't know exactly at this point what the videos do or do not show or the context or what they can prove, but the screenshots in and of themselves are important to establish what we call in the law a prima facie case, meaning at first sight or first impression, the evidence is sufficient to support the claims. Now, moving forward, Jones argues that he was working for Sean Combs under an implied work-for-hire agreement. Work-for-hire is when you're paid to create something for somebody else. You don't own the rights to what you create. In this case, Combs would own the rights to the songs that were produced by Jones, but Jones says he wasn't paid for the songs he produced, even though he says Combs and the defendants benefited from his work product. He says he was only offered $29,000 for all of his work over the course of 13 months. And talking about his job duties, during this time that Jones was working with Combs, he states that he was, quote, forced to solicit sex workers and perform sex acts to the pleasure of Mr. Combs. On or about February 2nd, 2023, Mr. Jones believes Mr. Combs drugged him. Mr. Jones recalls waking up naked, dizzy, confused. He was in bed with two sex workers and Mr. Combs. He also recalls aimlessly wandering around the house with no clothes on. Quote, as part of Mr. Jones' sex worker recruitment tools, Mr. Combs provided Mr. Jones with an exclusive bad boy baseball cap and required him to wear it to Booby Trap on the River, that's a strip club, as a signal to any sex worker he approached that Mr. Combs was in town and had sent Mr. Jones to recruit them. And you might be saying, well, what happens if Jones refused to do any of this? Well, Jones claims that Combs would use his power and influence to threaten and intimidate Jones. Quote, Mr. Combs would often switch up his approach. He would go from promising Mr. Jones the world to threatening Mr. Jones with physical harm. Mr. Combs threatened to eat Mr. Jones's face and inform Mr. Jones that he is willing to kill his mother, Janice Combs, if he must, in order to get what he wants, so he wouldn't think twice to harm Mr. Jones. Claims that he was also told Combs' head of security, Fahim Muhammad, had the power to make people disappear. And keeping up with that theme of instilling fear, Jones said that Combs would show off his guns, that he would brag about shooting people, that he confessed that he was responsible for that infamous 1999 shooting outside of a New York City nightclub. According to Jones, Combs had told him that J-Lo, who Combs had been dating at the time, she was the one who carried the gun into the club for him and passed the gun to him when he got into that altercation outside the club when shots were fired and 3 people were injured. Jones claims that Combs admitted he forced his artist at the time, Shine, to be the fall guy, to take the blame for the shooting. He was sentenced for 10 years in prison, by the way. Now, Jones claims that with all of this, he was terrified. He was terrified, and we're going to get into why that is important in just a bit. But Jones makes a comparison in this lawsuit to, of all people, Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, he claims that defendant Christina Courtroom, Combs' chief of staff, is like Ghislaine Maxwell, the former associate or madam of Epstein, who was convicted of her own sex trafficking-related charges, serving a 20-year prison sentence. For instance, when Jones went to Courtroom to report Combs, she allegedly said, quote, you know, Sean will be Sean. And Jones said that Courtroom made sure her assistants kept Combs high. She made sure that all the employees would readily carry around drugs for Combs whenever he wanted them. And that included forcing Jones to carry a drug pouch. She also made sure to procure sex workers for Combs. basically says that she was instrumental in this RICO or criminal enterprise of illicit drugs, guns, sex acts, including facilitating freak-offs, which we had heard of in the Cassie Ventura.
That single factor is what drove the sentence far beyond the few months the defense requested. The reaction in the courtroom was telling. Diddy, the man who built an empire on control and bravado, was reportedly stunned, holding his head in his hands as the 50-month sentence was read out. A man who prided himself on never being caught, on being untouchable, was forced to confront the harsh finality of a federal prison term. He had spoken before the sentencing, giving an emotional, tearful address where he apologized to his family and his victims, calling his behavior disgusting and shameful, claiming he was a changed man, humbled and broken to his core. But clearly, that plea for mercy, that performance of remorse, was not enough to sway the judge. The weight of the evidence, the massive, overwhelming evidence presented during the trial, spoke louder than any apology. The financial and professional fallout from this extended sentence is simply incalculable. His businesses, which were already bleeding assets and losing value, are now in a deeper crisis. His reputation, once golden, is now permanently tarnished by the word convicted felon and the public record of abuse. He was already stripped of an honorary doctorate. His partnerships evaporated. His media projects halted. The over 100 civil lawsuits filed against him, which accuse him of everything from sexual assault to sex trafficking, are now empowered by this lengthy conviction. The victims in those civil cases will be watching this sentence, knowing the criminal court has validated the core allegations of his predatory behavior. This prison term is not the end of his legal nightmare, it's just the completion of the first devastating chapter. The defense has already announced their intent to appeal the conviction and the sentence. This is standard procedure, but it underscores that the legal fight is far from over. The music stops, the lights go out, and all that's left is the silence of a prison cell. This is the new reality, the judge made sure of it. This extended sentence is a powerful, final chapter closing on one of the most shocking falls from grace in entertainment history. A final, devastating blow delivered by the legal system he once thought he could outrun. It's a moment of accountability that victims and legal observers alike will point to for years to come. That date, May 8, 2028, is now burned into the timeline of Sean Combs' life. The sentence is set. The time is now being served.